Jacob Caldwell adjusted his diplomatic jacket in the mirrored surface of the Requithian Council chamber doors. He wasn't sure why he kept doing that. No amount of fidgeting was going to make him look more authoritative. The young diplomat shifted his shoulders, forced himself to stand taller, and let out a sharp breath. "I'm just here to talk," he reminded himself. That's all it was supposed to be. "Ready, Caldwell?" His boss, Thomas Keating, approached, smoothing down his own, far more immaculate uniform. Keating was the lead envoy from Earth, an experienced statesman who had spent years handling difficult negotiations with alien species. Next to Keating's calm presence and perfect posture, Jacob felt like a nervous kid on his first day of school. "Sure," Jacob replied, although his voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, I'm ready." Keating gave him a brief smile. "Just follow my lead. The Requithians value formality, so keep your answers concise and respectful. If you're unsure, don't guess. Let me handle the tricky stuff." "Got it." Jacob hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. The doors slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a grand chamber filled with rows of Requithian delegates. The Requithians were an imposing people with sharp, angular features and skin tones that ranged from deep bronze to pale silver. They dressed in flowing, high-collared robes that shimmered faintly under the chamber's soft lighting. Their eyes, large and iridescent, followed the humans' every movement as Keating and Jacob made their way to the center of the room. The head of the Requithian delegation, a tall, stern-looking figure named Jaron Vec, stood from his ornate seat. "Humans," he intoned, his voice deep and resonant. "You seek to renew the trade agreements established by your predecessors. Yet I see no proof that your kind can be trusted to honor them." Jacob felt his stomach tighten. Great start, he thought. But Keating remained composed. "Counselor Vec," Keating began, bowing slightly. "We understand that trust must be earned, and we are here to reaffirm our commitment to mutual cooperation. Our delegation has reviewed the terms thoroughly and is prepared to address any concerns you may have." Vec's expression didn't soften. "Your assurances are meaningless without action. Words alone cannot rebuild what was lost." As the counselors murmured among themselves, Jacob shifted his weight uncomfortably. He hadn't expected to speak, but something about the way Vec said words alone gnawed at him. Despite Keating's warning to let him handle the tricky stuff, Jacob found himself stepping forward. "Counselor Vec," Jacob said, keeping his voice steady. "With respect, our words are the first step toward action. Without dialogue, we can't identify the solutions you need or offer the assistance we can provide." Keating shot Jacob a quick glance, but didn't stop him. The council chamber grew quieter, the delegates turning their attention to the young diplomat. "And who are you to speak for humanity's intentions?" Vec asked, his tone cool. "Your leader has not authorized you to speak." "I may not be the lead negotiator," Jacob admitted, "but I'm part of this delegation. I've studied Requithian culture extensively. I know that your people value honor and directness. If you doubt our sincerity, let us prove it. Tell us what actions would demonstrate our commitment, and we'll do our best to deliver." For a moment, Vec didn't respond. Jacob braced himself for a sharp rebuke, but instead, the counselor's gaze flicked to Keating, then back to Jacob. "You speak boldly for one so young. We shall see if your actions match your words." The meeting continued, with Keating taking the lead once more. As discussions dragged on, Jacob could feel the weight of the counselor's scrutiny on him. He answered a few direct questions about trade logistics, but mostly he watched, listened, and tried not to mess anything up. Hours later, the humans left the council chamber and stepped into the polished marble hallway outside. Keating turned to Jacob with a bemused expression. "Well, that was unexpected," he said. "I thought I told you to let me handle the tough questions." "I'm sorry, sir. I just felt—" "No need to apologize," Keating interrupted. "You handled yourself well, though I'll admit you caught me off guard. Just be careful next time. These negotiations are delicate, and one wrong word can make things worse." "I understand. I'll be more cautious." As they walked down the corridor, a new figure approached Nyara, one of the Requithian cultural advisors. She was shorter than most of her peers, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her deep bronze skin seemed to glow in the hallway's ambient light. Unlike the other counselors, she didn't radiate the same cold authority. Instead, there was something softer about her presence, something almost inviting. "Ambassador Keating," Nyara said with a polite bow. Her voice was lower than Jacob expected, with a lilting rhythm that made him lean in slightly to hear her better. I'd like to speak with your young diplomat for a moment, if I may. Keating hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Caldwell, I'll wait for you by the entrance. Jacob swallowed hard as Keating walked away. Nyara gestured for him to follow her to a nearby alcove. Once out of the main corridor, she turned to face him fully. You spoke well for a junior diplomat, Nyara said, her large, luminous eyes studying him. Few would have the courage to speak up in a chamber like that. Thank you, Counselor. Nyara, Jacob replied. I just wanted to make sure they understood our intentions. You have a natural ability to connect, Nyara said, tilting her head slightly. But you must be careful. In our culture, boldness can be seen as arrogance if not tempered with humility. I'll keep that in mind, Jacob said. It's just, this is my first time in a setting like this. I'm still learning. Nyara's expression softened. You'll find that learning never truly ends, no matter how experienced you become. She paused, then added, I know you've studied our history. Tell me, what do you think is the most important lesson your people can learn from ours? Jacob blinked, caught off guard. I think it's that unity doesn't have to mean conformity. Your clans and houses have unique traditions and customs, but they still find ways to work together when it matters most. I think humanity could benefit from that kind of balance. Nyara regarded him thoughtfully, her gaze unreadable. A perceptive answer. Perhaps you have more potential than I expected. She stepped back into the corridor, her voice echoing softly as she added, I look forward to seeing how you prove yourself in the days ahead. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jacob standing in the alcove. For a moment, he simply stood there, replaying the conversation in his mind. Then, squaring his shoulders, he headed back down the hall to join Keating. This was only the beginning. Chapter 2, Common Ground. Jacob stood in the Requithian archives, the faint glow of alien glyphs illuminating the chamber's curved walls. This was his favorite part of the embassy, the one place where the weight of politics seemed to fade. He traced his fingers over a holographic panel, reading the translation of an ancient Requithian text about their early spacefaring history. You're drawn to our stories, said a familiar voice. Jacob turned to see Nyara, her robes flowing as she approached. Her eyes flicked to the panel, then back to him. She was always quiet in her movements, but her presence carried a calm authority that Jacob had come to admire. They're fascinating, he admitted. Human history is all over the place. Wars, discoveries, more wars. But here it feels consistent, like everything's connected. Nyara's lips curled into a small smile. Consistency comes from understanding what matters most. We've had our share of conflicts, but the clan histories remind us why we exist together. Jacob tilted his head, intrigued. And what's that? Nyara gestured to the panel. To preserve our culture, our identity. To endure. It's not always easy, but knowing our origins gives us strength. That's something humanity could learn, Jacob said thoughtfully. We're so caught up in what's new that we don't always value our past. Sometimes it feels like we're just stumbling forward. Perhaps, Nyara replied. But your kind has a talent for adaptation. I've observed it in your art, your technology, even your diplomacy. You may stumble, but you also rise. Jacob studied her expression, searching for a hint of condescension, but found none. That means a lot coming from you. It's not every day a Requithian advisor compliments human adaptability. Nyara shrugged lightly. Flattery is not my intention. Simply observation. She motioned for him to follow. Come, there's something I'd like to show you. They left the archives and walked down a corridor lined with towering sculptures, each depicting a key moment in Requithian history. Nyara stopped in front of one that showed two figures, one standing tall, the other kneeling in what looked like an act of submission. The taller figure held a ceremonial blade, while the other held an ornate scroll. This, Nyara said, is from the Treaty of Ardakvaer, a turning point in our early interstellar age. Two rival clans at war for decades finally agreed to coexist. The scroll you see represents their pledge to follow a shared code of conduct. The blade reminds them of the consequences should that pledge be broken. Jacob examined the intricate details of the sculpture. It's striking. You can feel the tension even now. Nyara nodded. It's meant to remind us that peace requires vigilance. Understanding each other is only the beginning. Maintaining that understanding is the challenge. Jacob leaned back, his hands resting on his hips. So, you're saying humanity's challenge isn't just reaching out, but keeping that connection alive? Exactly, she said. Your willingness to be here, to learn from us, is a start. But it will take more than words to build a lasting relationship between our people. They continued down the corridor, stopping at another sculpture, this one depicting a group of Requithians working together to build a starship. Unlike the first, this scene was full of motion and collaboration. This, Nyara said, is from the era of the Great Expansion. Once the clans agreed to coexist, they turned their focus outward. They realized their survival depended on working together, pooling resources and knowledge. Jacob smiled. That's a lesson humanity learned during the early days of the United Nations. At least in theory. Nyara glanced at him, her tone softer now. In theory, yes. But theory must be put into practice. Tell me, Jacob, what have you personally done to advance our understanding of each other? The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, then said, I've studied your language, your customs. I've tried to be respectful in every interaction. Nyara raised an eyebrow. Is that all? Knowledge and respect are valuable, but they are not enough. What have you built? What have you created? Jacob frowned, considering her words. I guess I haven't thought of it that way. I've been so focused on not offending anyone that I haven't done anything truly constructive. Nyara's expression softened. Then let us change that. Come with me. She led him to a small chamber he hadn't seen before. Inside, a Requithian craftsman was assembling a complex device, a hybrid of organic and mechanical components. The air was filled with the hum of energy fields and the faint scent of heated metals. Nyara introduced the craftsman, Tarek, who greeted Jacob with a respectful nod. Tarek is a master builder, Nyara explained. He's been working on a project to combine Requithian and human engineering principles. I believe you might have some insights to offer. Jacob blinked. Me? I'm not an engineer. No, Nyara said. But you understand human technology. You have a unique perspective. Sometimes, the outsider sees what the expert overlooks. Tarek gestured toward the device. We are attempting to create a new type of energy converter that can function efficiently on both Requithian and human ships. Our current models are too specialized. But perhaps you can help us think differently. Jacob hesitated. I'll try, but I'm not sure how much help I'll be. Sometimes, Tarek said, it's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. Jacob stepped closer to the device, examining the intricate patterns etched into its surface. He asked Tarek about the components, why certain materials were used, and what problems they'd encountered. As they discussed potential solutions, Jacob found himself suggesting ideas based on human modular designs, concepts that allowed for easy upgrades and repairs. Tarek considered Jacob's input, then began making adjustments. Within minutes, they had improved the device's efficiency by 10%. Tarek gave Jacob a rare smile. Your perspective was most helpful. Jacob grinned, a bit surprised by the success. Maybe I'm more useful than I thought. Nyara's eyes sparkled with approval. You see now what it means to contribute. This is what we need, people who can bridge the gap between our worlds. As they left the chamber, Jacob felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. For the first time, he wasn't just observing or mediating, he was actively building something that mattered. And while the path ahead was still uncertain, he realized that true understanding required more than dialogue. It required action, collaboration, and the willingness to step beyond comfort zones. Thank you, Jacob said as they walked. I mean it. You've given me a lot to think about. Nyara gave him a small nod. You've taken the first step. Now, let's see where it leads. Chapter 3, Crisis at Dawn. Jacob paced the small conference room, his boots clicking on the polished floor. Outside, the faint light of the Requithian dawn painted the horizon in hues of silver and violet. The embassy's windows offered a spectacular view, but the scene before him was anything but serene. A diplomatic emergency had just been declared. A rogue Requithian commander was threatening to blockade the vital Kevran trade corridor, a move that could spiral into open hostilities. Nyara stood near the central table, her expression calm but her voice low and firm. We need to act quickly. If Zirak's fleet blocks the corridor, it will undermine the entire peace agreement. Your delegation must convince him to stand down before it's too late. I understand that, Jacob said, rubbing the back of his neck. But how do we even get Zirak to the table? He's already declared that he doesn't recognize human authority. Talking to him might be pointless. Keating, who had just entered the room, folded his arms and frowned. It's not just about talking. We need a show of unity, a coordinated effort. Jacob, you've been working closely with Nyara. Do you think you two can convince him together? Jacob glanced at Nyara, who returned his gaze with a measured nod. It's worth a try, Jacob said. But we'll need a plan. We'll need more than a plan, Nyara said. We'll need trust. Zirak's clan has always valued strength and honor above all else. If we approach him without a clear demonstration of both, he won't even hear us out. Great, Jacob muttered. Strength and honor. We've got plenty of the second, but the first? Not so much. Nyara placed a hand on the table, her fingers tapping lightly. What we need is a mediator, someone who has influence within Zirak's ranks. Keating raised an eyebrow. Do you have someone in mind? Nyara hesitated. There is one individual, Commander Rythar, a former ally of Zirak. They served together in the early expansion campaigns. If we can convince Rythar to accompany us, Zirak might listen. Jacob sighed. Another commander. Let me guess. This one also doesn't recognize human authority. Nyara's mouth twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. Not quite. Rythar is known for being pragmatic. They may not trust humans, but they do value results. Keating nodded. It's our best shot. Nyara, set up a meeting with Rythar as soon as possible. Jacob, you'll go with her. If this works, it might just prevent a disaster. A short time later, Jacob and Nyara arrived at a Requithian military outpost on the edge of the diplomatic zone. The structure was angular and imposing, its metal surfaces reflecting the pale light of dawn. A pair of Requithian guards escorted them inside to a private chamber where Commander Rythar awaited. Rythar was a tall, broad-shouldered Requithian with sharp, piercing eyes. Their voice carried a deep, commanding tone as they greeted Nyara. Advisor Nyara. It's been a long time. Indeed it has, Nyara said, bowing slightly. Commander Rythar, I've come to ask for your help. Zirak's actions threaten to unravel years of progress. Rythar's gaze shifted to Jacob, narrowing slightly. And this is your human companion, the one who speaks so boldly. Jacob stepped forward, meeting Rythar's intense gaze. I'm Jacob Caldwell, and yes, I've spoken up when it mattered. Right now, it matters a lot. Rythar studied him for a moment, then let out a low rumble of laughter. You have spirit, but spirit alone will not sway Zirak. Why do you think I would join you? Because, Nyara interjected, you understand the consequences if this blockade succeeds. It will set a precedent. The clans will fracture, trade will collapse, and both of our peoples will suffer. You know Zirak better than anyone. If you speak to him, he'll listen. Rythar crossed their arms, considering the words. Finally, they nodded. I'll accompany you, but on one condition. This human, Jacob, must be the one to deliver the message. Zirak needs to hear it directly from him. Jacob blinked in surprise. Me? Why? Because, Rythar said, you are an outsider. Your words will carry more weight. Zirak will expect platitudes from his own kind. If you can make him see reason, it will mean far more. Jacob glanced at Nyara, who gave him an encouraging nod. All right, Jacob said. I'll do it. The trio made their way to Zirak's flagship, a massive vessel hovering in low orbit above the trade corridor. The ship's interior was as imposing as its exterior, with towering ceilings and intricate carvings along the walls. They were escorted to the command chamber, where Zirak sat on a raised platform, flanked by his officers. Zirak's eyes narrowed as the group approached. Nyara, Rythar, and the human envoy, you come uninvited. We come to prevent a mistake, Nyara said calmly. Zirak's lip curled. A mistake? I would call it correcting an imbalance. The The humans have grown too bold. This blockade is a necessary measure. Necessary? Jacob spoke up. Zirak, do you really think cutting off trade will make humanity weaker? All it will do is breed more resentment and hostility. It's not strength, it's self-sabotage. Zirak's gaze snapped to Jacob, his voice sharp. And why should I care what a human thinks? Your kind has no place in our affairs. I'm not here to tell you how to run your affairs, Jacob said. I'm here because what you're doing will hurt everyone, including your own people. Trade isn't just about goods. It's about connections, understanding, and cooperation. Without it, both of our worlds suffer. Zirak leaned back, his expression unreadable. Rythar St. Alliance will fracture, and the consequences will be far worse than you imagine. There was a long silence. Jacob held his breath, waiting for Zirak's response. The Requithian commander finally rose, his towering form casting a shadow over the room. You are bold, human, Zirak said. But boldness is not enough. If I lower this blockade, it will not be because of your words. It will be because it is in the best interest of my people. Make no mistake, if humanity oversteps again, there will be no more negotiations. Understood, Jacob said, keeping his voice steady. We'll do everything we can to prevent that. Zirak's expression remained stern, but he gave a single nod. I will withdraw my forces. For now. As they left the flagship, Jacob felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Nyara glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. You did well. Thanks, Jacob said. But I couldn't have done it without you too. Rythar chuckled. Perhaps we make a decent team, after all. It wasn't a victory parade, but as the dawn light brightened the horizon, Jacob allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. This time, words had been enough. Chapter 4, A Moment of Understanding. Jacob stepped into the dimly lit council chamber, the soft glow of the Requithian torches casting long shadows on the stone walls. He'd been in this room before, but tonight it felt different. The air was heavy with anticipation. Around him, members of the Requithian delegation murmured quietly, their voices blending into a low hum that filled the cavernous space. In the center of the room, Nyara stood by a raised platform, her calm presence anchoring the growing tension. Are you sure about this? Jacob asked, his voice low as he approached her. Nyara turned, her bronze skin catching the light. I am. It's the only way forward. Jacob glanced at the others gathered, the tension in their postures. They don't look too convinced. They're cautious, Nyara replied. Requithians value tradition and what we're attempting is unconventional. But they know what's at stake. Jacob nodded, his stomach tightening. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of the room or his own nerves, but every step closer to the platform felt heavier than the last. So, what's the plan? He asked. Nyara gestured toward the platform where an ornate Requithian artifact sat under a glass dome. That is the Veyron stone, a symbol of unity from our ancient treaties. By tradition, anyone who touches it must swear an oath to uphold the peace. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Sounds straightforward. Just walk up there, place a hand on it, and make the promise. Nyara's gaze softened. It's not that simple. The gesture carries immense weight in our culture. It's more than a promise, it's a bond, one that cannot be broken without severe consequences. Jacob glanced around at the gathered Requithians. And they're okay with a human making that promise? They're hesitant, Nyara admitted. But you're not just any human. They've seen you stand beside me, heard you speak. If anyone can convince them, it's you. Jacob took a deep breath, nodding slowly. All right, let's do this. As they stepped onto the platform, the murmurs quieted. All eyes were on them now. Jacob felt the weight of 100 gazes, each one scrutinizing his every move. Nyara stood beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. He drew strength from her calm confidence. Nyara raised a hand, silencing the room entirely. We stand here today to take a step that has never been taken before. For generations, the Veyron stone has bound our people to peace. Now we invite another to join that bond. Jacob stepped forward, his heart pounding. He hesitated for just a moment, then reached out and placed his hand on the smooth, cool surface of the stone. He closed his eyes, gathering his thoughts, then began to speak. I, Jacob Caldwell, representative of humanity, pledge to honor the peace we have fought so hard to achieve. I swear to work toward understanding, to value our differences, and to protect the bond we have formed. When he finished, a ripple of quiet whispers spread through the room. Jacob opened his eyes and glanced at Nyara. She gave him a small, approving nod. Jaranvek, the head of the Requithian delegation, stepped forward. His sharp features were unreadable as he stared at Jacob. You speak boldly, human. But words are not enough. I understand that, Jacob replied, keeping his voice steady. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. I'm asking for the chance to prove myself and humanity worthy of that trust. Jaron studied him for a moment longer, then turned to the assembled council members. The human has sworn the oath. Let it be known that the Vaer in stone now binds him as it binds us. But let him also know this, if that bond is broken, the consequences will be dire. Jacob nodded. Understood. The chamber remained silent for several tense seconds. Then, one by one, the council members began to bow their heads, acknowledging the new bond. It was a small gesture, but it carried enormous significance. Jacob felt a wave of relief wash over him as the tension in the room began to ease. Nyara turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. You've done well. Jacob exhaled slowly. Thanks. I just hope this works. It will, she said. We've taken the first step. Now we must build on it. As the council members filed out of the chamber, Nyara and Jacob remained on the platform, watching them go. When the room was empty, Jacob turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Why did you trust me to do this? He asked. Nyara met his gaze, her expression calm. Because I've seen your willingness to understand, to learn. And because trust must begin somewhere. If we don't take the risk, we'll never move forward. Jacob smiled, though it was a bit shaky. I appreciate that. I'll do everything I can to live up to it. Nyara's lips curved into a small smile. I know you will. They left the chamber together, walking side by side through the quiet halls of the embassy. The weight of what they'd just done hung between them, but so did a sense of purpose. Jacob didn't know what the future held, but for the first time he felt like they were truly making progress, one step at a time. Chapter 5, The Turning Point. The sound of boots echoing in the embassy's main corridor brought Jacob's attention back from the reports spread out in front of him. He glanced up to see Keating striding toward him, a data tablet tucked under one arm. His expression was stern. We've got a problem, Keating said without preamble. Jacob sighed, pushing the reports aside. What now? Hardliners on both sides are stirring up trouble. The Requithian Council is split, and some of our own officials back on Earth are calling for more aggressive policies. They're undermining the progress we've made. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. We've barely gained their trust. If we start pushing them too hard, they'll walk away, Keating finished. Which is why we need to take action now. Nyara is gathering her allies among the council to push back against the hardliners. We need you to work with her. Build support for maintaining the trade agreements. Jacob nodded slowly. All right, I'll meet with her right away. Good. And Jacob, Keating added, his voice lowering, be careful. The stakes are higher than ever. Nyara was waiting in the diplomatic library, her expression calm but her posture tense. The library was one of the few places in the embassy where she seemed to relax normally. Today, however, the shelves of glowing Requithian scrolls and the faint hum of the translation nodes offered little comfort. Jacob, she said as he entered, her voice carrying a note of relief. I'm glad you came. You heard about the hardliners, Jacob said, settling into the seat across from her. I have. It's not surprising. There are always those who fear change, who see cooperation as weakness. Jacob leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. So, what's the plan? How do we counter them? Nyara took a deep breath, her gaze steady. We need to show them that this alliance benefits everyone. They're focused on what they might lose, power, influence, control. We must shift the conversation to what they stand to gain. Easier said than done, Jacob said. How do you convince someone to give up their grip on power? By offering them something more valuable, Nyara replied. Economic stability, technological exchange, access to new markets. These are things that even the most stubborn counselor will consider. Jacob nodded. All right, where do we start? I've scheduled a series of private meetings with key council members, Nyara said. We'll go together. They'll listen to you, your perspective as a human is unique, and they're curious about your intentions. I hope that curiosity is a good thing, Jacob said wryly. What about Jaranvek? He still seems skeptical. Nyara's expression turned thoughtful. Jaran is cautious but not unreasonable. He'll listen if we present a united front. But we must tread carefully. He's the one most concerned about appearances. If he thinks we're trying to undermine his authority, he'll shut us down. Jacob tapped the table absently. So we show him respect, acknowledge his leadership, and frame everything as a benefit to his people. Exactly, Nyara said. I believe we can win him over, but we must proceed carefully. The first meeting was with Councillor Revel, a staunch traditionalist who had previously opposed even the smallest trade agreements. Jacob and Nyara entered his chamber where Revel sat behind a massive carved desk, his silvered robes flowing around him. His expression was cold. What do you want, Nyara? Revel asked, his tone clipped. We came to discuss the trade agreements, Nyara said evenly, and how they can strengthen your clan's position. Revel's eyes narrowed. Strengthen? I find that hard to believe. These agreements only dilute our traditions and bring us closer to dependency on outsiders. Jacob stepped in, his voice calm. Counselor Revel, I understand your concerns. Change is difficult and there's always a risk of losing something important. But consider this, by engaging with humanity, your clan gains access to new resources, technologies, and alliances. These aren't weaknesses, they're tools to secure your people's future. Revel's gaze flicked to Jacob. And why should I trust the words of a human? Because, Jacob said, we've worked tirelessly to understand your culture. We've respected your traditions and we've sought ways to benefit both of our worlds. The trade agreements aren't about making you dependent, they're about creating opportunities for everyone. Nyara added, and it's not just about trade. By working together, we can prevent the kind of conflicts that have fractured our worlds in the past. Stability, prosperity, these are goals worth pursuing. Revel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he said, I'll consider your words. But know this, if I sense even the slightest hint of dishonor, I will withdraw my support immediately. Understood, Jacob said. We'll prove that this alliance is in everyone's best interest. Their next stop was Jaran Vek's office. Jaran greeted them with his usual stern demeanor, his sharp features betraying no hint of his thoughts. As they sat across from him, Nyara began by outlining the recent trade statistics, showing clear economic growth since the agreements were signed. I see the numbers, Jaran said, his voice cool. But numbers are not the issue. The issue is trust. There are those among us who still question humanity's intentions. Jacob met his gaze, his tone steady. I won't deny that trust takes time. But I also believe that trust is built through action. Every step we've taken, every agreement, every exchange has been about creating a foundation of mutual respect. Words, Jaran said, leaning back. What actions will you take to ensure this alliance remains balanced? We'll continue to show transparency, Jacob said. Any new trade routes, resource exchanges, or cooperative projects will be fully documented and presented to the council. You'll always know what we're doing and you'll have a say in it. Jaran's eyes narrowed. And if humanity ever seeks to dominate these agreements? Nyara spoke up. Then we will hold them accountable. Just as we expect the council to hold its members accountable. That is the strength of this alliance. It's not about one side having power over the other. It's about ensuring that everyone benefits together. There was a long silence as Jaran studied them both. Finally, he nodded. Very well. I will not oppose these agreements for now. But remember, you will be watched closely. By the end of the day, Jacob and Nyara had spoken to nearly every key council member. Some were more receptive than others, but the tide was slowly turning. The hardliners still had their influence, but their voices were growing quieter. As Jacob and Nyara left the council chambers, Jacob let out a long breath. That was exhausting. Nyara smiled faintly. Diplomacy often is. But you did well. I think we made progress, Jacob said. At least, I hope we did. We've planted the seeds, Nyara said. Now we must nurture them. Jacob glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. You really believe we can turn this around? Nyara's smile widened just slightly. Yes, I do. As they walked through the embassy's halls, Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time it felt achievable. They weren't just talking anymore, they were making a difference together. Chapter 6, A New Path Forward. Jacob stared at the reports spread out across the embassy conference table. The numbers showed a steady increase in trade volume between Earth and the Requithians, but there were still gaps, critical areas where cooperation needed to grow. He pinched the bridge of his nose and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It was progress, but not enough. Not yet. Nyara entered the room quietly, as she often did, her bronze-colored robes flowing softly with each step. She carried her own stack of documents, which she set down on the table before taking a seat beside him. You look tired, she said simply. Jacob gave her a faint smile. I could say the same about you. Diplomacy is not known for its leisurely pace, she replied, a hint of humor in her tone. He gestured at the reports. The numbers are improving. Slowly, but improving. If we keep this momentum, we might actually convince the holdouts that this partnership can work. Nyara nodded, scanning the data. The council's hardliners remain cautious. But Jaran is no longer actively opposing us, and a few others are starting to show interest in expanding the agreements. Jacob leaned forward, tapping one of the data pads. I think we can get them on board if we focus on co-developing technologies. Something tangible that benefits both sides equally. Shared innovation has a way of breaking down barriers. Nyara considered his suggestion. It could work. Presenting a clear, shared benefit will make it harder for them to argue against. What kind of project do you have in mind? I've been thinking about the energy converters, Jacob said. Remember when we worked with Tarek to improve the efficiency of that hybrid model? If we scale that concept, it could become the standard for both human and Requithian starships. Affordable, adaptable, and jointly designed. Nyara nodded slowly. That would show them the practical value of cooperation. It's a project they can see and use, not just another abstract trade deal. Jacob stood and began pacing, his mind working through the logistics. We'd need to get Tarek on board again, maybe form a joint engineering team. A mix of human and Requithian specialists working side by side. If it's successful, it could be the proof everyone's been waiting for. Nyara's gaze followed him as he paced. And how do you propose we present this? The council will need more than a concept. Right, Jacob said, nodding. We start by drafting a detailed proposal. We include initial test results, a projected timeline, cost estimates, and clear benefits for both parties. Then we bring it to Jaran first, privately. If we get his support, the others will be more likely to follow. Nyara smiled faintly. A solid plan. Let's begin drafting it immediately. Over the next few days, Jacob and Nyara worked tirelessly, pouring their efforts into the proposal. They met with Tarek, who was initially skeptical but eventually agreed to help. Together, they outlined every aspect of the project, ensuring there were no ambiguities or weaknesses that the hardliners could exploit. Jacob found himself spending more and more time with Nyara, not just in the conference rooms but in quiet corners of the embassy where they could discuss ideas without interruption. They shared meals over data ads, traded cultural stories in between strategy sessions, and occasionally laughed at the absurdity of intergalactic bureaucracy. One evening, as they reviewed the final draft of the proposal, Jacob leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. I think we've got it. This should address every major concern they might throw at us. Nyara glanced at him, a hint of warmth in her gaze. You've put a great deal of effort into this. So have you, he said, smiling. I couldn't have done it without you. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the embassy's environmental systems. Then Nyara spoke, her voice soft. Do you remember the first time we met? Jacob chuckled. How could I forget? I was so nervous I could barely string a sentence together. You were eager, Nyara said, a small smile forming on her lips. Eager to learn, to understand. That eagerness is what drew me to work with you. Well, I'm glad I didn't scare you off, Jacob said lightly. You've taught me more about diplomacy, culture, and cooperation than I ever thought I'd learn. Nyara tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. And you've reminded me that taking risks can lead to great change. Jacob met her eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. You're not just talking about diplomacy, are you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached across the table, resting her hand lightly on his. The touch was brief, but it sent a wave of warmth through him. You've proven that understanding is possible even across great distances. Jacob turned his hand over, letting their fingers brush. And you've shown me that the differences that divide us can also bring us closer. The moment lingered between them. They had built something together, not just an alliance, but a connection that transcended their roles as diplomats. Jacob wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that with Nyara by his side, they could face whatever challenges came next. The following morning, they presented their proposal to Jaranvek. The Requithian council leader read through the documents carefully, asking pointed questions at every turn. Jacob and Nyara answered each one calmly, providing detailed explanations and supporting data. When they finished, Jaran sat back in his chair, his expression inscrutable. This is well prepared, Jaran admitted after a long silence. The project has merit. It could indeed benefit both of our peoples. So, will you support it? And we will ensure its success. As they left Jaran's office, Jacob exhaled deeply. That went better than I expected. Nyara smiled. Jaran may be cautious, but he values pragmatism. Once he sees progress, he'll be fully on board. And the others? Many of them will follow Jaran's lead, Nyara said. But we'll need to continue building support. This is only the beginning. Jacob nodded, his confidence growing. Then let's get to work. Over the next several months, the energy converter project took shape. Engineers and scientists from both species worked side by side, sharing knowledge and innovating together. Early test results were promising, and the Council's hardliners found themselves with fewer and fewer reasons to oppose the alliance. The project's success became a symbol of what could be achieved when humans and Requithians put aside their differences and worked together. Through it all, Jacob and Nyara remained at the heart of the effort, guiding the collaboration and ensuring that trust continued to grow. Their partnership had started as a diplomatic necessity, but it had evolved into something much deeper, a connection that neither of them had anticipated. As the first fully operational energy converters were installed on both human and Requithian ships, Jacob and Nyara stood together in the embassy's observation deck, watching as a Requithian freighter departed for Earth. The ship's engines hummed quietly, powered by the very technology they had helped create. "We did it," Jacob said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Nyara glanced at him, her expression warm. "No. We did it. Together." Jacob met her gaze, his smile growing. "Together."